Welcome to this next lecture in my series on alchemy and the alchemy of paint. We are at the Vienna Academy of Visionary Art. It's the 2019 Winter Trimester. And our academy clearly is dedicated to the pursuit of visionary art. And so I would like to take some time today to look at images which are certainly visionary in nature and also pursuing alchemical themes. Where possible, I try to give the artist due credit. In the case of this particular image, I'm sorry I don't have the artist's name, but it is definitely a beautiful visionary image of the Ouroboros, which is to say the serpent devouring itself. Here, in a certain sense, the prima materia as the serpent devours itself. Here, as the earth, air, fire, and water, the four serpents devouring each other. And even here, the two serpents devouring each other, perhaps mercury and sulphur. These are tarot cards, and they're just three of the series of major arcana, which were created by an artist who goes by the name of Iona, also Giona. And through some research, I was able to establish that, in fact, these were created by Giona Fiocchi, and he created something called the Iona Tarot. It's actually quite rare. There are not many in existence, and the plates have since been destroyed by time. So those who possess the original series are quite happy. As you can see in this card over here, that you have definite alchemical themes emerging, even though this is part of the tarot of the male and female opposite each other within this tree emerging from the bath. Here you have what must be the moon card with this chalice, and the chalice surrounded by the phases of the moon. And on the far right then, what would appear to be a version of the world card with the serpent with its tail in its mouth at the very top, the Ouroboros, the symbol of the cosmos with the feminine and the feminine triangle upside down at the bottom. I did do some research to find out more about this artist since I was very intrigued by his work. And I did find out that, in fact, Giona Fiocchi did work with Professor Ernst Fuchs as well as his son Daniel Friedemann here in Vienna, and probably assisting Ernst Fuchs with some of the engravings that he did. As you know, the Vienna Academy of Visionary Art was co-founded with Professor Ernst Fuchs to carry on his vision and his techniques of painting. So I think it's appropriate then that Giona Fiocchi was able to contribute to our pursuit of alchemical imagery in visionary art. These next series of images are also from tarot cards, from the Tarot Revisioned, as it's called, by Leigh J. McCloskey. Here on the left you have the Fool, but the very interesting fool, very, in a certain sense, wise fool, around this metal ring emerging from the chalice like a rainbow are the words omnia ad unum, and then on the other side, omnia ab uno. So here, all from the one, all returning to the one. Pouring forth another vase of lightning down below, and in this lower world, the serpent with its tail in its mouth. It's filled with beautiful, interesting, arcane imagery. On the far right, the Sun card, and the Sun card is a beautiful depiction of humanity, the male and the female combined as one, influenced by two serpents wrapping themselves around this figure, with earth, air, fire, and water engraved in this wheel of fire surrounding humanity as well. These other cards, now you have the Star as part of the major arcana on the left, and she taking apart this globe, this globe of the stars themselves, and peering inside and discovering within what lies within. And on the far right, then, the Wheel of Fortune, but a Wheel of Fortune like I've never seen before, with this eye at the center, perhaps the divine eye, which I've described in other lectures as this eye which gazes upon itself, mirroring itself in the cosmos. And here, what it sees in the mirror of the cosmos is the zodiac wheel surrounding itself. I've never met Leigh J. McCloskey, but he is definitely an interesting person. He's a founder of the Olander Foundation for Emerging Renaissance. And he lives in this interesting apartment, which is filled with painted designs over all of his books, over all of his furniture, as well as his sketchbooks, which, as you can see here, in this particular sketchbook, filled with interesting ideas, designs, visions, and so on. Two interesting artists pursuing alchemical themes are Albin Brunowski, who does appear in a book called L'Art Visionnaire by Michel Randon. Otherwise, I haven't seen many other references to his work, but he created engravings, and here you have the alchemical vessel with a woman, perhaps nature herself, holding the moon and the sun, and this giving rise to a masculine form emerging from the vessel with this inverted sun in the bottom. On the far right, Michel Maschka, who I did meet personally when I was working with Ernst Fuchs, and he had also assisted Ernst Fuchs at an earlier time. This is his engraving of Hermes Trismegistus, and you can see the great Hermetic philosopher with his alchemical vessel here containing the sun and moon above the fire and the earth, air, fire, water below. All of this, as the Hermetic philosopher himself, is contained in this kind of half stone cutaway temple in which he appears. A really interesting, beautiful image. Now we come to Madeline von Foerster, who studied the Misch technique of Ernst Fuchs through one of Ernst Fuchs' followers or students. That would be Philip Rubenov Jacobson. And she's been carrying on this tradition of practicing the Misch technique of painting. And in these particular paintings, then, she's reprising established alchemical images, but as paintings. Here you can see the red, the black, and the white of alchemy, the red king, the white queen within the philosophical egg. And there, the cosmos itself forming, breaking apart. Other images by her, then, the conjuncto, as it was called, the male and female coming together in sexual embrace as the sun and the moon, the king and the queen, giving rise to the alchemical child as a result. And on the far right, the two dragons or serpents, one red, one white, so one being mercurial, the other one being more like sulfur, and those two coming together, and then the emergence of the three flowers above. These images are by Peter Proksch, and Peter Proksch was a contemporary of Ernst Fuchs. He lived here in Vienna. I was fortunate to exhibit with him and meet him, a very genial man. And as you can see in the painting on the left, you have four creatures, and the creature at the bottom is a water creature, whereas the creature at the top is a airy creature, a creature of the skies. This unicorn is an earthen creature, and here on the left, the fiery creature. So you have here fire, air, earth, and water being symbolized in an allegorical fashion by these four animals. The Ouroboros here on the far right, circling this tomb, if you want, from which a fire emerges. More images by Peter Proksch. This is like an expansion of the earlier allegory. Again, the watery creature, here the whale, and then here something like a chameleon or a salamander. And it should be known that the salamander is the allegorical creature who can live in the fire and not be burned. Then the creatures of the air, and finally the creatures of the earth. So now not just 4 creatures, but the 4 realms beautifully depicted. And on the far right, rising from the tomb in the night sky, moon, sun, star, male, female, and their child, a falcon-headed figure like Horus. Now I come to Johfra. Johfra being one of the members of the 5 Dutch metarealists. His name, Johfra, comes actually from Johannes Franciscus van den Berg, and he created some of the most iconic images of the 70s and 80s in the world of esoterica. This is a poster of his. It's a triptych called Unio Mystica, and you can see that this left wing and the far right wing have elements which contrast each other, she being this earth goddess above here, and he being a sky god pouring forth the water. Mercury and Mars on the left, and Venus on the right over here. So masculine, feminine polarities. And at the center, these come to one in the form of the anthropos, the human figure in the 5-pointed star. And then from all of these images, you see, for example, the Eye of Horus within the triangle over here being crowned and so on. An amazing, beautiful image of all coming into one, the Unio Mystica. You probably know Johfra's work through the Zodiac series, that in the early 70s he was commissioned by Verkerk, which was a publishing firm, to create the 12 Zodiac signs. And over the course of a year he painted all 12 images of the Zodiac. Amazing accomplishments. I'm going to just give you one of them, which is the Gemini. And in this one, the Gemini, alchemical, and even tarot themes reemerge. The tarot, we have here Temperance on the left and the Fool on the right. Thoth was the baboon god, and here's Thoth holding the world in his hands, with the caduceus, the entwined serpents, being held by the male and female half of the twins. Atop the caduceus then is this mirror, the mirror that is at the center of the all. It is like the mirror, the one mirror that reflects the all, the multitude. Columns here on the left and on the right from the Kabbalah, and a dragon with its tail around this column, topped by the cup, topped by the baton, more tarot images, the moon and the sun, and the two, the male and the female, coming together in this interesting form of the hermaphrodite, she holding the straight rule and he holding the compass, two images of sacred geometry and indeed of the creation of the entire cosmos according to the principles of geometry. An amazing image, just the zodiac sign of Gemini, but in it a whole world of tarot, Kabbalah, alchemy combined. So Johfra did approach the theme of Hermes Trismegistus twice, and this is the first version of Hermes Trismegistus and the second version, which the first version, much more muted in its tones. He typically used gray underpainting in his work, and you can see how he's creating glazing, these optical effects on top of the gray underpainting. Here, the glazing of the color is much stronger. Again, masculine, feminine, sun and the moon. And here, nature herself, she's attached to the earth with Platonic solids, or rather the foundation to all shapes, the sphere, the cube, and the triangle, leading in a passageway past these beautiful crystals onto the fiery world, whereas the other one is leading past these animals and trees to the watery world. And finally, here, Hermes Trismegistus, or rather perhaps humanity, because when we read the Hermetic texts and the Poimandres, we have this vision of humanity as surrounded by the 7 cosmic spheres, the planets, which determine his fate. And this particular figure is surrounded 7 times by the coils of the serpent that rises higher and higher above him. So a vision of Hermes Trismegistus. Johfra took his mother's maiden name, and occasionally he signed his work as Johfra Boschart. And he was commissioned by the Lectorium Rosicrucianum to create a series of illustrations to the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, or Rosenkrantz. And each of these is deeply symbolic. He spent quite a few years as a member of the Lectorium Rosicrucianum, which is to say the order of the Rosicrucians had their own school or reading room, lectorium, and this was in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and there he studied Hermeticism as well as Gnosticism and other esoteric traditions for a number of years. So here, the wedding that takes place at the end of Christian Rosenkrantz's journey, where he sees the combination of the male and the female, their wedding into one. On the far right, this is an illustration from a vision in the Old Testament where it's recorded, I saw a colossus with, I can't remember the exact phrasings, but legs of brass and a breastplate of silver and a crown of gold, but its feet were of stone, and because its feet were of stone, it collapsed. An amazing vision. With the tree of the Kabbalah on the far right, and lots of other interesting images to pursue in your meditations. More illustrations by Johfra. On the left, I don't know for sure, but I imagine sulphur and mercury devouring each other, or perhaps 2 acids devouring each other. Again, a figure surrounded by the serpent, now the serpent devouring this figure. And on the right, this interesting image of Johfra himself being confronted by an angel. He's turning away from his alchemical studies, and this angel appears, scaring him out of his wits. I would like to finish with a series of engravings by Ernst Fuchs. This is called The Passion of the Unicorn. And he created these engravings in the years 1950 to 1952. Ernst Fuchs was born in Vienna and studied in Vienna, but he moved to Paris in the early 50s. And we see him here as a young man sitting in a cafe working on one of his drawings. And he wrote in his autobiography, "With the help of a broken loop from the 19th century, I was able to engrave the Unicorn series." And sure enough, here he is, young man in Paris with his broken loop, working in a cafe. And here's a picture of Ernst Fuchs at the time that I knew him, and I worked actually in this studio in Monaco. I worked on that painting, and these are my own paintings that you see here in the background, Christ Alchemist and the Mystic Diptych behind him. So here's he with, again, a loop. I don't know if it's the same loop, but the loop that he carried with him all of his life, giving him entrance into the higher worlds through this mystical eyepiece. So the Passion of the Unicorn series, it's a cycle of 7 engravings, and you can see here what they would look like if they were kept together in their series of 7. And he writes that he was very inspired at the time by C.G. Jung's book Psychologie und Alchemie, which is Jung's own journey into alchemy and alchemical imagery. And by reading that book, Ernst Fuchs became inspired. So we begin with the first two engravings, and as you can see, he's just kind of getting his feet wet in the world of alchemy. It begins with the first of 7, Im Totenreich, in the kingdom of the dead. And here the unicorn has not quite appeared, but will appear by the second engraving. But you have this unicorn-like figure, and you have these kind of alchemical vessels or chalices emerging. Fuchs allowed the imagery to emerge naturally from the unconscious without trying to, he was very much a surrealist in that sense, without trying to disturb the flow, the natural flow of the images. In the second one, Der Künstler und das Einhorn, so the artist and the unicorn, that now the unicorn has emerged, holding the stylus in which all of these images will be engraved, guided perhaps by this figure on the left who would be his inspiration. By the third engraving, Die Zeugung des Einhorns, the procreation of the unicorn, we're in a world that's fully immersed with alchemical themes. So here's the unicorn at the bottom, and at its feet it's holding this interesting device, something which will appear time and again in Fuchs's work, called Die Behälter des Weltalls, the vessel of the universe. And you have this eye in the center of this egg-like transparent structure, this eye in the center of the cosmos, viewing the cosmos, creating the cosmos, reflecting upon itself through the cosmos. The unicorn appears a second time over here, now holding the chalice in its hands instead of the universe. This chalice with the angelic Christ-like figure, and then finally the great chalice. And this great chalice with the marriage of the sun and the moon coming together sexually in the chalice. The procreation of the unicorn. The fourth of the 7 is on the right over here, Die Taufe des Einhorns, the baptism of the unicorn. And now, obviously, here in this vessel, dipping, and the devil himself behind seems to be pouring the liquid into this vessel in which Christ is being baptized. So a kind of image of baptism, but a baptism of suffering, let us say, of immersion into the world, the lower world of the demonic forces, and this angelic Christ-like figure being immersed in the darkness. The fifth of the 7 is called Die Versuchung des Einhorns, the temptation of the unicorn. And it is a very graphic image. In fact, it was censored several times, but it is expressing his intense longing at the time for the feminine element. She, over this alchemical pool with this reflection of her as a much older woman, like the maiden and death, and he, the unicorn, with his longing. By the 6th in the series, we have Im Erwartung der Auferstehen, awaiting the resurrection. And now Christ as what is called the Schmerzmannes in German, the man of sorrows, the man of pain. He has resurrected from the dead, and the unicorn now appears on the altar as this beast devouring itself, eating its own tail, the unicorn as the Ouroboros, with, once more, this egg on its head, this symbol of Behälter des Weltalls. The 7th is the most majestic. It's a very large engraving. It's called Der Triumph des Einhorns, so the triumph of the unicorn. And now If you know Ixion, Ixion was condemned to Tartarus, the Greek underworld, as being crucified upon a wheel. And so we see Ixion here crucified on the wheel, the cosmic wheel of the sun of time. The tower rises up, the tower protected by these swords, and the unicorn triumphant emerges within this tower, which is in a certain sense an immense chalice, alchemical chalice. All of these images are open to interpretation, but it gives you an idea of how he was pursuing alchemical themes just through these series of 7 engravings. Other images contemporary with this series of engravings would be the one on the left, a painting in the Misch technique called The Marriage of the Unicorn. And now we have an allegorical image of Ernst Fuchs himself on the left, as well as his wife or partner at that time. And they are standing above this interesting image of several children with this swan emerging from an egg, the swan with the crown of thorns, and this Gothic motif of pressing down the crown of thorns. And again, the Ouroboros figure, the unicorn with his tail in his mouth. An amazing image where you can see he kept it with him for many years as his vision evolved and transformed. On the right, a work done in ink, and it's on exhibition here in Vienna at the Ernst Fuchs Museum. You can see that he has taken the watery ink and created patterns, and from those patterns, the spirit of Mercury or the mystery of Mercury emerges, this allegorical figure of Mercury. And finally, this beautiful work by Ernst Fuchs, and we only have a black and white photograph of it because the painting itself, the original, is lost, or we don't seem to have any trace of it. And it's sad because it's one of his most alchemical of all paintings. It's kind of a nod to Van Eyck and the marriage of the lamb. And whereas in Van Eyck you have a lamb above this fountain, here you have the unicorn above the fountain pouring forth its blood into the chalice, an image of Christ rising from the tomb. Here is a woman with the sun and the moon in her arms, a child on the ground, probably the Christ child, lion on the left, woman playing a cello on the right, symbolic of harmony, of music, and all of these who are greeting the unicorn with the candles in their hands, the lighted tallows, while some form of a city, perhaps Sodom and Gomorrah, burning in the background. It's really quite an amazing painting. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to show you the main figure here, because above this unicorn then is this male-female figure holding once more the egg in his/her hand, and below the woman who symbolizes the marriage of the sun and the moon, bringing those two together in the alchemical chalice. So that is a brief summary then of visionary art, alchemy and visionary art. And I think here in our academy in Vienna, we hope to pursue more such images, understanding that alchemy is, for the artist, a place where the painting itself can be treated as an alchemical vessel, and that using specific pigments, perhaps relating to the planets, we can create images which have a magical, even a theurgical significance, as well as images that become the Behälter des Weltalls, become the vessel of the universe, images in which the eye, the divine eye, sees its marvelous creation reflected in all the elements of the cosmos. So, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this journey through alchemy and visionary art.